Have you ever felt that you have an invisible chain that binds you to patterns of pain that you cannot explain? Have you wondered why, regardless of how much you work in yourself, you still feel trapped in dynamics that drain your soul and sabotage your happiness? If there is a wound that remains hidden in the depths of your psyche, silently dictating every relationship that forms, every decision you make and every judgment you make on yourself, is the unheeded maternal wound. Most people spend their entire lives without realizing that they are living not their own life, but the life that their maternal complex allows them to live. Carl Jung, the revolutionary psychologist who mapped the deepest territories of the human psyche, understood that the relationship with the maternal figure transcends the personal and connects with archetypal forces that mold the fate of our soul. It is not just your mother as a person. It is the archetype of the mother who lives in your unconscious, and that can be both the source of your greatest healing and the root of your deepest suffering. Jung knew that until you face this truth about your mother, both the light and the shadow of this primary relationship, you will remain psychologically chained to patterns that you did not choose consciously, but that govern your life from the depths. On this deep trip through Jung's teachings, we will explore the 5 crucial aspects of the maternal wound that are sabotaging your ability to live as a sovereign adult. The maternal complex and its archetypal power, the shadow mother that devours, instead of nourish bleeding in your present life. Get ready for an encounter with truths that are rarely spoken out loud, but that have the power to free yourself from chains that you didn't even know you were carrying. There is an ancestral force that molds each fiber of your being before you are even aware of who you are. Carl Jung called her the mother's archetype, and it is not simply the woman who gave you birth. It is something much deeper, more primitive, more powerful. It is the primary image that lives in the collective unconscious of all humanity, the great mother who creates and destroys, which both nourishes and devours. When you feel that inexplicable stab in the chest when thinking about your mother, when you paralyze your disapproval, or when you desperately look for your validation even being an adult, you are not responding only to a person. You are responding to an archetypal force that transcends the personal and connects with the deepest of the human psyche. The maternal complex is formed in those first crucial years when your child's psyche, as an emotional sponge, absorbs not only your mother's words, but her emotional state, her unresolved fears, her wounds without healing. Jung understood that the real mother becomes the vehicle through which the archetype manifests in your personal life. If your mother was emotionally absent, critical, controlling, or emotionally unstable, those qualities are intertwined with the maternal archetype in your unconscious, creating what Jung called a complex, an autonomous set of emotions, thoughts, and behaviors that operate independently of your conscious will. This complex is not just a memory. It is a living psychic entity that influences every decision you make, in every relationship that forms, in each trial you make about yourself. What hurts most is that this maternal complex dictates your self-image in ways that you cannot even consciously perceive. If your mother saw you as too sensitive, not strong enough, or a disappointment, those perceptions become the lens through which you see yourself. Jung noted that we carry inside a maternal imago, an internal image of the mother who continues to speak, judging and controlling us long after we have grown up. This imago is not the real mother, but a psychic construction that combines your real experiences with archetypal projections. That is why you can feel like a helpless child even in your adult body when certain emotional buttons are pressured. The tragedy is that most people live all their lives without realizing that they are responding not to present reality, but to this internal maternal complex. Your patterns in relationships, your ability to love yourself, your ability to establish healthy limits. All this is deeply influenced by the quality of this first archetypal relationship. Jung knew that until this complex is conscious, until you bring it in the light of consciousness and examine it with compassion, but without sentimentality, you will remain psychologically chained to patterns that you did not choose consciously, but that govern your life from the shadows. Now we must enter the darker territory, in which Jung identified as the shadow aspect of the maternal archetype. Shadow mother is not evil in the conventional sense. It is the devouring face of the archetype, which consumes instead of nourishing, the one that controls disguising itself as love. This psychic force operates with sophistication that may take decades to be recognized because it is surrounded in the clothes of care, concern, and protection. Jung understood that Mother Shadow is perhaps the most destructive strength in psychological development because her main weapon is to blame, and guilt is the most effective poison for the human soul. Shadow Mother manifests in subtle but devastating ways. It is the voice that tells you that you are selfish for wanting independence, that you are cruel to establish limits, that you are ungrateful for questioning toxic family dynamics. This psychic force has perfected the art of making you feel responsible for the emotions of others, especially for the emotional well-being of the maternal figure. Jung observed that this type of emotional manipulation creates what he called mystical participation, an unhealthy psychological fusion where you cannot distinguish between your own emotions and those of your mother. You live in a constant state of emotional hypervigilance, monitoring the maternal mood as if your survival depends on it, because at a certain primitive psychological level, this is how it feels. The most insidious imprisonment occurs when you internalize this shadow mother and becomes your most ruthless internal critic. Jung understood that we carry not only the image of the nutrition mother, but also that of the devouring mother, and the latter can completely dominate the psyche if it is not recognized and consciously confronted. This gloomy internal voice whispers that you are not enough, that your needs are too much, that your pain is not valid, that you must be perfect to deserve love. It is the voice that sabots your relationships because it tells you that you do not deserve to be loved as you are, that you must win affection through the constant sacrifice of yourself. This inner shadow mother is relentless in her criticism and generous in her guilt. The most disturbing thing is how this bleak force unconsciously attracts you towards relationships that recreate the original wound dynamics. Jung called this repetition compulsion, the unconscious tendency to recreate family patterns of pain, because even if they are destructive, they are known and therefore feel safe for the psyche. You are choosing couples who are emotionally unavailable, critical, or controlling. Not because you consciously want to suffer, but because your unresolved maternal complex attracts you to the familiar. The internal shadow mother recognizes and feels comfortable with these toxic dynamics because they replicate the emotional environment in which your psyche formed. Breaking this pattern requires not only to recognize the shadow mother, but to develop courage to face it directly and claim your right to exist as a sovereign being. Here, we reach one of Jung's deepest discoveries. Even when the physical mother is no longer present in your daily life, you carry inside an internal mother that continues to rule your thoughts, emotions, and decisions from the shadows of your unconscious. This internal maternal imago is like a software program that is executed in the background in your psyche, influencing every aspect of your life without being aware of its presence. Jung understood that this internal mother can be even more powerful than the external mother, because it operates without the resistance you could offer to an external figure. It is your own voice, but speaking with the words, judgments, and expectations of the original maternal figure. This silent dictator has full access to your most intimate and vulnerable thoughts. Meet exactly what buttons to make you feel small, inappropriate, or guilty. If your original mother was critical, this internal voice will be relentlessly critical. If it was a controller, this internal voice will sabotage any attempt at real independence. If it was emotionally manipulative, this internal voice will use guilt and shame as control tools. Jung noted that many people spend decades in therapy trying to change behavior patterns without realizing that they are fighting this internal mother who has an almost hypnotic power over their psyche. It's like trying to change the software while the operating system remains intact. The most insidious thing about this internal mother is how you disguise your own voice. When you think, I'm not good enough, I'm too sensitive, I shouldn't want so much, I'm selfish to put my needs first, you think these are your own thoughts and judgments. But Jung taught us to ask ourselves, where do these thoughts really come from? Do they sound relatives? Do you remember having heard these words or feelings before? Most of the time you will discover that these autocritical thoughts are echoes of the original maternal voice, now completely integrated into your internal dialogue. This internal mother not only criticizes, also reward and punish, creating an internal control system that replicates exactly the dynamics of your childhood. The release of this silent dictator requires what Jung called differentiation, the ability to distinguish between your authentic voice and internalized voices of parental figures. This process is terrifying because it means questioning thoughts and beliefs that you have considered yours throughout your life. It means developing what Jung called discriminative function, the ability to examine every critical thought and ask you, is this really what I believe about myself, or is it the voice of my internal mother speaking? This differentiation is the first crucial step towards what Jung considers the true individuation, becoming who you really are, not who your internal mother says that you should be. We now arrive at the heart of your life's most important psychological work, the symbolic separation of the maternal complex to achieve what Jung called individuation. This is not a process of hating or rejecting your mother, but of psychologically differentiating yourself from the archetypal forces that have governed your psyche since childhood. Jung understood that remaining psychologically merged with the maternal complex means living a life borrowed, playing a role that was written for you instead of writing your own story. Individuals requires what he called separatio, an alchemical separation that allows your true self to emerge. This separation process is terrifying because it means facing what Jung identified as one of the most primitive fears of the human being: fear of abandonment and guilt for individuation. Your child psyche learned that your survival depended on maintaining the connection with the maternal figure, even if that connection was toxic. Now, as an adult, that same psyche interprets any attempt of differentiation as a mortal threat. The internal mother will activate all her control mechanisms. Guilt. How can you be so selfish? Fear. If you separate, you will be completely alone. And shame. You are a bad person for wanting independence. Jung knew that these feelings are not evidence that you are doing something wrong. They are evidence that you are doing something necessary and transformative. The symbolic separation requires what Jung called descent to the unconscious, a brave journey towards the depths of your psyche to face not only your mother's shadow, but your own shadow. You must confront the parts of it that have been complicit in maintaining toxic dynamics, the parts that have preferred the security of fusion about the uncertainty of autonomy. This descent is not comfortable. Jung compared him to a symbolic death. The you that you have been, the obedient son, the compulsive caregiver who always puts the needs of others first, must die so that the sovereign adult that you really are can be born. This death of the dependent ego is painful, but absolutely necessary for psychological rebirth. Jung understood that this separation and individuation process is not a unique event, but a continuous process that requires constant surveillance. The internal mother does not disappear simply because you have recognized her. Continue trying to reassure your control, especially during moments of stress or vulnerability. Individuals requires developing what Jung called transcendent function, the ability to maintain tension between opposites, dependency versus independence, family loyalty versus personal authenticity, without collapsing towards any extreme. It is learning to honor your story and your origins while claiming your right to write your own destiny. This is the true psychological maturity, not the adolescent rebellion against parental figures, but adult differentiation that allows authentic relationships based on conscious choice instead of unconscious compulsion. Jung revolutionized our understanding of psychological symptoms when seeing them not as defects or diseases, but as symbolic expressions of unresolved archetypal energies. The symptoms of the unheeded maternal wound are messages of the unconscious, signs that the maternal complex continues to operate from the shadows, sabotaging your ability to live as a sovereign adult. These symptoms are not your fault, but they are your responsibility to heal, because they represent parts of your psyche that they are shouting integration and healing. The chronic internal critic is perhaps the most universal and devastating symptom. This implacable voice is never satisfied, which finds failures in everything you do, which constantly compares you with others and finds you poor, is the internalized shadow mother operating as a psychic tyrant. Jung understood that this internal critic is not your authentic voice. It is an introyecto, an external voice that you have swallowed and now operates as if it were yours. This critic sabots your self-confidence, paralyzes your creativity, and keeps you in a constant state of anxiety for performance. It doesn't matter how much you do externally. This voice will always find reasons to tell you that it is not enough, that you could have done better, that others are superior to you. The self-abandon pattern is another devastating symptom that Jung connected directly to the unresolved maternal complex. You learned early that your value depended on how well you could anticipate and meet your mother's emotional needs. Now, as an adult, you continue this pattern by automatically sacrificing your own needs, desires, and limits to maintain peace and avoid conflict. You have become an expert in reading the emotions of others and adjust your behavior accordingly, but you have completely lost contact with your own authentic needs and desires. Jung saw this as a form of soul loss, a disconnection of your authentic center that leaves a vacuum that you try constantly through external validation. The attraction to toxic relationships is another symptom that Jung understood as repetition, compulsion, the unconscious tendency to recreate painful family dynamics because they are known and therefore feel normal. You are attracted to couples who are emotionally unavailable, critical, controlling, or narcissists, not because you consciously want to suffer, but because your unresolved maternal complex recognizes and feels comfortable with these dynamics. These relationships allow you to continue playing the family role of the caregiver, the rescuer, or the one who always gives more than what he receives. Jung knew that until the original maternal wound, you will continue to attract and be attracted to relationships that confirm your unconscious beliefs about your lack of value. The central wound of insufficiency permeates all these symptoms as a conductive thread. It is that persistent and painful feeling that, regardless of what you do or achieve, you are simply not enough as you are. Jung understood that this wound is not based on the present reality, but on the conclusions that your childhood psyche brought about yourself based on your mother's emotional responses. If your mother was emotionally absent, your child's psyche concluded, "I am not interesting enough to keep your attention." If it was critical, you concluded, "I'm not good enough." If I was a controller, you concluded, "I can't trust my own judgment." These children's conclusions became fundamental beliefs about your identity, and now, decades later, they continue to operate as absolute truths in your unconscious, sabotaging your ability to experience your own inherent value and your right to exist exactly as you are. What you just explore are not simply abstract psychological concepts. They are the master keys to understand why your life has taken the paths he has taken, and more importantly, how you can claim your power to write a new chapter. Jung taught us that individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, is not a spiritual luxury, but a fundamental psychological need. The non-healed maternal wound is not a judgment for life. It is an initiation that is calling you to a deeper level of authenticity and personal sovereignty. Recognizing the maternal complex, facing the shadow mother, differentiating yourself from the internal mother, performing symbolic separation, and healing the symptoms of this ancestral wound is not easy work. It requires the courage of a spiritual warrior and the compassion of a sage. But Jung knew that this work is not optional if you want to live a life that is truly yours. Every step you take towards the healing of this primary wound is a step towards freedom, towards authentic relations, towards self-esteem that does not depend on external validation, and towards a connection with your deepest self than any external force may break. Which of these aspects of the maternal wound resonated more deeply with you? In what area of your life can you see more clearly the influence of the unresolved maternal complex? What symptoms do you recognize in your own experience? Share your reflection in the comments. Your courage to name these truths not only accelerates your own healing, but it can be the lighthouse of hope that another search engine needs to begin its own trip towards individuation. If this content has touched something deep in your soul, if you feel that finally someone is speaking the language of your most intimate experience, then this channel is your spiritual home. Subscribe in the name of the channel and activate notifications, because we do not make superficial content for superficial minds. This is a sacred space for deep thinkers, for brave search engines, for those who are tired of living borrowed lives and are ready to claim their authenticity. Like this video if you feel that these words have been medicine for your soul, and share it with someone you know you need to hear these truths. Remember, you are not broken, you are waking up. You are not crazy, you are healing. And you are not alone on this trip to becoming who you really came to be. Until the next exploration in the depths of the psyche, and never forget that your authentic light is exactly what this world needs.